So this are the different vertebrae that we have in our body. We can classify them into three major categories. You're going to have what we call your cervical vertebrae. Cervical vertebrae are the ones here in the front. If you look at them, all of them are going to have this hole here on the side. So if it's a hole, by now you should know that it will be called a foramen. And because it's on the side, it's called a transverse. So if you're in doubt of which vertebrae it is, just make sure that you look if it has a hole on the side, and if it does, it's going to be called your cervical vertebrae. Then these two are examples of what we call thoracic vertebrae, and the last one is a lumbar vertebrae. Now we're going to be talking about all these and the different features that these have, but just so you know, you're going to have 7 total cervical vertebrae. You're going to have 12 total thoracic vertebrae and 5 total lumbar vertebrae. Now one thing that you can use to remember this is like major times of the day where you have, or when you retire, you will have your main meals. So you have your breakfast at 7 in the morning, so 7 cervical vertebrae. You're going to have your lunch at noon, so 12 thoracic vertebrae. And you're going to have your dinner at 5 p.m., so that's going to be 5 lumbar vertebrae. The other thing that you can use to sort of differentiate them is by turning them towards you, and you can see how they have different animal faces. So this one looks like a little giraffe, at least for me, but whatever animal works for you is fine. Now the lumbar looks like a little moose for me, but whatever looks for you is fine too. And the cervical, for me, they look like sloth from Ice Age, but whatever works for you. So let's talk a little bit about the cervical vertebrae, because they have specific features that the others don't have. So I did talk already about the transverse foramen. The other thing is that the cervical vertebrae is going to have 2 vertebrae that are specific and very different from the others. The first one is the atlas, which is the first vertebrae. So C1 is known as the atlas. And you can see that it's going to have this smooth surface over here, which is the surface that is going to articulate with the occipital condyle. Remember how we saw on the cranium the occipital condyle? That's where the occipital condyle is going to articulate, right over here on this superior articular facet. The other thing that you notice is that C1 does not have a body right over here. This means that the body of C1 actually came to C2, so this is C2, which is known as the atlas. And you can see how C2 has this little structure that sticks out, which actually is the body of the atlas that fused over here with the body of the axis. Okay, so that's how it goes. And this structure that sticks out is called the dens. So now let's go to the thoracic vertebrae. And the thoracic vertebrae is going to have a few features that all the vertebrae have. So they have these 2 structures here that stick out. These are called superior articular facet. And if you turn around on the bottom, you're going to have the inferior articular facet. So articular facet means that they are going to articulate with each other. And because all vertebrae articulate with each other, so they're all going to have a superior articular facet and an inferior articular facet. Now one feature that the thoracic vertebrae has that the others don't have are the costal facets. Now costal facets mean that they are going to articulate with the ribs. So your ribs are only present within your thoracic region, so that's why the thoracic vertebrae are the only ones that have the costal facets. So we have 3 different costal facets. You have the ones that are going to be located in your transverse process, so these things that stick out over here are called transverse process. Therefore, here you have your transverse costal facet. And then over here, you're going to have another, see how it's squished over here? So you're going to have this is called the superior costal facet. And then down here, you're going to have the inferior costal facet. So these are the three facets that the thoracic vertebrae has. Now, it's not that suddenly it will transition into being a lumbar. It transitions slowly. So when you come further down, even though this looks like a lumbar vertebrae, it's actually still a thoracic vertebrae. And how will you know? Because it still has costal facets. But it only has one costal facet here on the side. It doesn't have a superior and an inferior one. It just has one costal facet. But it still has a costal facet, so you know it's thoracic. When we get to the lumbar, you're going to see that the lumbar does not have a costal facet. And of course, the body is going to be bigger, so this is the body. If you compare the body of a thoracic with the body of a lumbar, you can see how the size is very different. The other thing is that how do you know what's superior and what's inferior? It's easier on the thoracic one because the spinous process, which is this pointy thing that sticks out over here, is always going to be pointing down. So here is your spinous process, this is your spinous process, this is your spinous process. So you can see how it's sort of pointing down over here on the lumbar.